So good to see you again, Andrew, Dr. Andrew Huff. We actually spoke this morning and our entire conversation crashed. And so we're doing it again, take two. Dr. Huff is a scientist, he's an epidemiologist, he has a military background. He's the closest person we have to getting to the bottom of where this virus came from. He worked at Echo Health Alliance, I believe, 2014 to 2016. And you recently had a interview with Tucker last Monday, where you shared the shocking story. I mean, you became a whistleblower, and then they targeted you. And I want to just follow up on that interview with Tucker and maybe dive into some things a little bit more deeply. So my theory with this virus, I believe it was a weapon. I don't believe it was an accident of nature, and I believe it was intentionally released. And I believe that the CIA was involved in this and are now involved in a cover up. The CIA cozied up to China to get their biotech secrets, in the guise of scientific cooperation, but really they're in there to try to get the data from the enemy, and in doing that, they created a gigantic mess and now are involved in a cover up. So I want your take on that.
Well, I think you hit all the key points. The interesting aspect is that the intelligence community has been involved in this bioweapons sphere for a number of years. There was something called Operation Paperclip, where they actually brought in a number of Nazi scientists in the United States to continue the U.S. bioweapons program. And that's when a lot of this cloak and dagger bioweapons and dual use technology and countermeasure, aka vaccine or drug therapeutic technology development, really takes off throughout the Cold War. And then that progresses to current day. When I say current day, the last 2 decades, where this technology has really taken off. The interesting aspect of this is, I guess we still don't know whether or not this was intentional or an accidental release. All the evidence seems to point to a accidental release in the Wuhan Institute of Virology bioweapons lab. Now, there's been so many psychological operations and misinformation campaigns. I wouldn't put it past the intelligence community to actually have seeded that information with China out to the public, to people like me that would pick it up and analyze it and say, well, this is really where the source of the outbreak is, because there's actually a classic epidemiologic method or study type design that tells you conclusively where an outbreak began. And so, where's the index case? That's the first case. That's what we're always looking for. And the way that you do this is you typically go and look at the historical record of blood donation samples. So this would be samples that were donated or through the sorry, my coffee hasn't totally hit me. It's the evening. It's blood donation samples, blood bank donation samples. So these contain a historical record, because people are always donating blood on a continuous basis. So basically, you would go collect a bunch of samples from these blood donations, and you analyze them to see whether or not they had SARS-CoV-2 in it. And then after doing that and going through that process, you would know, you'd have a rough idea where and when this disease emerged, at least in the United States. And you can then take it one step further. You can then analyze the genetics of the agent itself and look and see how it evolved over time, because it's a rapidly evolving disease. That tells you more about how the pathogen spread. So it begs the question, if I know this method, and this is the classic method that we've used on pretty much every other large epidemic in modern history, why haven't we done that now?
Well, we haven't done it because they created the virus. That's my theory. Does that sound correct?
Well, maybe. See, there's a different angle or a different way to look at this. Is that this isn't the first lab escape, if that's the case, that's caused a pandemic. Flu escaped out of a Russian laboratory in the late 70s and went pandemic, and they didn't really make a big deal out of it. There was no psychological operation, and everyone was trying to figure out where it came from. And now it looks like it leaked out of this laboratory due to research that they were doing in potentially on bioweapons in that lab. So,
oh wait, was that? Wait, hold on. I had the Russian flu. When was that? In the 70s?
Yeah, I think I'm a little rusty on that. I should know this specifically. I think it was like 77 or
Yeah, I
78.
remember
Yeah.
that actually. I got really sick as
Yes.
a kid. Sorry. Okay, so
It,
did they? How did they confirm that that was a lab leak?
well, they didn't initially, and they didn't make a huge deal out of it. I mean, it was a sort of a terrible disease that swept across the planet quickly, and I think people in the biodefense community, and I wasn't even born yet, so I'm 43,
Mhm.
but looking at the literature and the textbooks and other experts that trained me, if you start to follow the source and where they're working on this agent, it traces back to this lab, and they didn't wage some huge psychological operation for a lab leak. In fact, a lot of the laboratories in the United States that are conducting gain of function work have had leaks before in terms of a laboratory worker becomes infected at work and then they go into the community and the case gets detected at a local healthcare provider. Because most of the times when they have one of these high risk laboratories in the community, they sort of put the healthcare workers on alert that they might need to look for unique things coming in from people who work at that lab. So they usually ask that question, or they're supposed to ask the question, do you work at a lab? And which lab do you work at? And then that is hopefully supposed to set off the alarms at the local healthcare providers.
So they didn't make it well, but you said it was confirmed as a lab leak eventually. And did they? I mean,
Well,
or
yeah. So this is the debate. So I mean, you can ask like who are the experts in the room, and whether or not you believe their opinion, because there are people who believe that was still a zoonotic emergence event. I don't know any of my peers or all my peers who work in biodefense and public health all believe that was an accidental release.
okay. So, but this, I mean, why is this situation different then? I mean, why? I mean, it's vastly different. And also like, why is the CIA reached out to Peter Daszak, right? And why did the CIA get involved with Wuhan and what is their relationship, do you think?
Sure. So the intelligence community broadly, not just the CIA, excuse me, not just the CIA, but the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Energy, the Department of State, Department of Defense. They really have a difficult problem on their hands. Really, they want to know what's going on in all these different foreign laboratories around the planet so they can get ahead of threats and mitigate those threats if they exist, if someone's trying to develop bioweapons against us. And I think that's a good thing. A big part of this is also in non-proliferation, meaning that scientists like myself would go travel overseas and try to form positive relationships in the name of science with foreign scientists. But in my case, I never did gain of function research with those foreign scientists. With now back to the CIA and their motivation around this, and it's two different prongs. I mean, so one, in the context of how you do dual purpose research, you have to build the agent first before you can develop the countermeasure. The countermeasure in this case ended up being the SARS-CoV-2 mRNA mod RNA technology, and how that fits in with EcoHealth Alliance is that EcoHealth Alliance was going around the planet collecting viral specimens from unique places. And so basically we were building a large genetic data bank for all the nastiest viruses on the planet, specifically trying to target coronaviruses. Then with the samples that we collected, that information then, genetic information or samples themselves would be passed down the scientific chain, so to speak, to a scientist or pharmaceutical company that would then engage in gain of function research technology to develop countermeasures. And none of this is speculation. I've actually posted all my documents to prove this on the X app. If you go search my history feed, I reposted it on the Tucker Carlson feed near the top. I think that click here to take a look at all my documents. We actually gave a investment pitch to a company called In-Q-Tel, and many people have not heard of In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is the CIA's venture capital firm. It's a government entity, but works very closely with the private venture capital and tech space and biotech space to develop interesting new technologies which serve a specific purpose for the US government. In our previous take one of this interview this morning, I started walking through the process of how this works. But typically, to get money from In-Q-Tel, you identify a need or a product that the government has. The government agency, like Department of Defense or HHS, will then give you a letter saying, if you can develop and deliver X quantity of this product, or service, we will buy it. Then you take that letter over to In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel says this is great. And then they work with their network of private sector investors along with the government to get the company seed funded up and producing the technology and scaling it. And then once complete, then you sell it back to the government. It's actually if you're an entrepreneur, it's a pretty sweet deal because you have a guaranteed customer to already buy your product, and then it sets up the investment money. So it becomes very difficult for the entrepreneur in the business to fail. So if you look at In-Q-Tel and who they've invested into, one of the biggest companies they invested into was Moderna. And so Moderna has been making all this mRNA technology for years. And then if you look through the spider web of companies making the precursors and other technologies, it begins to be this very incestuous mix of people between the so-called revolving door in bioweapons, pharmaceutical, biodefense, public health. You see a lot of movement between the Department of Defense, the White House Office for Science and Technology Policy, the CIA itself, In-Q-Tel, FDA, DOD, if I didn't name them, and then over to the pharmaceutical space and these startups. So if you were to look at the sort of like the network analysis of the individuals involved, you'll see a lot of names that you're probably familiar with, and then you can see how they've moved through these different companies. And I actually, if when the audience watches this, you can go look at my feed. I actually posted several different diagrams from a journalist named Destiny, who's been excellent at investigating this on her own with no inside knowledge. And she's created some diagrams to show you exactly how people move around and how the money flows. So this is not secret, but very, what's a good way of characterizing this? It's not secret, but it's very well known, I guess, in the entrepreneurial venture capital world.
Yeah, and it's daunting trying to untangle it all. Was In-Q-Tel an investor in Echo Health Alliance? Were they partners?
Great question. We covered that earlier. So we had actually made a pitch to In-Q-Tel. So Dr. Peter Daszak, who was my boss, came to me and said, "Hey, we have to make an investment pitch to In-Q-Tel." So he worked on the pitch deck, basically a PowerPoint presentation, brought it over to me, and then he wanted me to add my materials on it. So like the first, I think 20, 25 slides are all his portfolio work with basically us going around fishing for viruses globally, so then we can develop vaccines or medical countermeasures. That's his whole pitch. You guys can go check that out and take a look at the documents. It's right there in Dr. Daszak's own words. And then my section of research, I actually work more on the intelligence side of infectious diseases, developing artificial intelligence tools to detect infectious diseases around the world. So most of this presentation pitch deck is Peter's work. Then there was my little piece of the pitch. Peter actually went, I think, to In-Q-Tel to make the presentation, or somewhere in Washington, D.C. I didn't go to make the presentation. To my knowledge, we did not receive investment from In-Q-Tel. Sometimes they do secretive, kind of quiet investments. I don't know if that happened after I left. It's possible. The interesting thing is that In-Q-Tel did invest in one of our partner companies named Metabiota. So Metabiota was run by Dr. Nathan Wolf. He's since went somewhere else, I believe. And the interesting thing about Metabiota is that it was invested into by a company by the name of Rosemont Seneca, which was Hunter Biden's venture capital firm. So if you take a look at all the different entities and people involved, it's very much a group of I don't want to say elite, but very closely social networked individuals revolving around venture capital, technology, and the government.
I believe on Tucker, you said that the mRNA platform will not survive. But when you're describing all these powerful people and this just network of tech and big pharma, it seems like a huge hurdle to get these to get the COVID shots pulled off the market. But what makes you think it can be done?
Well, I think it's just a matter of time if the data coming out from the cohort studies being conducted. Eventually, the cohort studies will lead to more structured trials, I believe, or better designed studies, where you have better causal inference. just recently, there was a massive cohort study in South Korea, which I mentioned on Tucker Carlson, where I think they identified 5 or 6 different cancers associated with mRNA vaccines. And that seems to match what the actuaries have found over on the health insurance and payer side. So all these things are coming together. And what I think happens eventually is that there's a tidal wave of injuries, claims, and liability, which it just catches up with the product, and everyone has to, make the decision: do we keep living with this lie that this is working? I mean, at least specifically for the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, it's not safe. There's acute injuries and there's long-term chronic injuries from it, and it's definitely not effective. And the risk of the disease today is not as severe as it was when it first emerged, because I believe it evolved to be less severe over time, which usually is what infectious diseases do according to viral evolution theory. So there is one other interesting aspect on this, which we didn't touch on this morning, is that the mRNA technology actually has more practical application in animal production. So we typically don't care about long-term diseases in pets and animals. So for example, you give your pet Advantix, your cat or your dog, and that's to prevent taxi, but you're actually giving them a pretty high dose of a pesticide and ivermectin and other things, which can be harmful to an animal over, if it had a longer lifespan. So if a dog lived 50 years, that could cause cancer. However, since we don't have that concern with animal production and the animal has a shorter lifespan, mRNA might stick around in the animal production world. But in terms of human health, I think the writing's on the wall. I think there's 2 aspects to it. There's the scientific public health viewpoint of, is this causing injuries, disability, death? And then there's also the public perception. Will the companies be able to market this? And if people are scared of it, they think it doesn't work, they're not going to take it. And I think we're already at that point. If you look at the number of vaccines that they've sold for SARS-CoV-2, it's dropped off tremendously. So these companies, they're businesses, and if nobody's buying their product, they're not going to continue to make it.
And do you think when they released these products, they understood the risk? I mean, or do you think it was they were naive about the risk? Or do you think it was, we have to do it anyway, despite all the risks?
That's a good question. So I think there's a couple different things going on. So I think they saw a huge opportunity, and it looked very lucrative to the companies involved. So from their perspective, they didn't have any liability. They're immune from being sued from putting on a potentially dangerous project. They had the U.S. government and global governments around the planet begging for the product. If you follow the whistleblower Brooke Jackson and her work, it appears that they went so far to just force the companies, the CROs that were doing the clinical trial and toxicology work, to either hide or fabricate or alter results to have the appearance that it was working properly. And there's all sorts of tons of ethical issues with that. But I mean, if you were the pharmaceutical company, this was a win-win situation. You just had to get your product out as fast as possible. And that's what they did. So, I don't know what that means in terms of their ability to survive or future liability and what kind of regulations or policies come. But, I suspect that the U.S. population at least won't allow this to go on forever.
Do you think Trump made a backroom deal with Pfizer like 2 weeks ago when he brought him into the Oval Office?
I mean, that's what it looks like to me. Whether that's what occurred or not, I mean, the perception is, to me, that they had all these vaccine injury claims pending. There's this whole COVID origin debacle, which still hasn't been fully resolved. And then President Trump has AstraZeneca and Pfizer in within a week, I think, at the White House, and makes deals so that they can get lower prescription drug prices. And my major criticism of that is that $70 billion is not nearly enough to cover the cost of the injuries. And if we're giving them more money to invest into things like mRNA technology, I mean, it's sort of not a great deal. I think the U.S. government spent a total of about $6 billion on actual SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. But unfortunately, the amount of injuries and disability and death probably far outweigh that. So I actually went and analyzed the number of veterans or service members who were likely discharged due to vaccine injury, and then we're going to be placed on veterans disability at a rate of 100%, which is about $4,500 a month, I believe. And when you then model that out over the course of their life, the U.S. government's going to pay out probably $1 trillion over the lifetime of this population of vaccine injured veterans. So it's a tremendous amount of money. And that's not even for treating their conditions either. That's just the disability payments. Now, if you take a look at the U.S. population, we're going to have similar kind of costs over there. So this is costing us more money over time. Like I said, it's only a matter of time before the actuaries and insurance providers, their financial backers, and the government all figures out that this is a problem.
Yeah, I worry it's really going to impact the human race. We talked about this morning, that just the disability, the impact on fertility, the increased mortality. But let's pivot, because I brought you on here actually to talk more about food. And you had, there's a little tie-in here, because you were targeted by, you were stolen. You had documents stolen from your house by a naval, we think from a naval intelligence officer, Mike Bennett, and he thought he was getting the missing link, the missing COVID sequences, the data that would finally confirm or whether or not this was a lab leak or this was just a natural evolution of the virus. Can you tell us what happened there?
Sure. So one of the things I discussed in the Tucker Carlson interview is that I had a conversation with a reporter by the name of Miranda Devine. We had a great conversation. I believe that conversation was eavesdropped on by the government. I was probably already under surveillance because I was the only person talking publicly who was connected to this whole thing. Shortly after that, a man came into my life. He actually approached my company, my chief revenue officer, head of sales, and they were working on something called a co-sale agreement to sell the product. He was going to sell our company's product for us. And to close that deal, he requested of the CRO that he speak with me, and I'm the CEO, which is very common in sort of that world. He wants to get to know me, and I have to help close the sale. So when we get on the phone and we start talking, he immediately pivots the conversation to EcoHealth Alliance. He knows all of the key players. He knows the research we're doing, who is working on different aspects of the company. And I immediately peg him as a CIA operative. I even told him on the phone, I'm like, you're a CIA agent. Because we had spoken on the phone at this point for an hour and a half, and he's going through everything related to the gain of function work. Even after telling him that he was a CIA agent, I decided to continue to speak with him because I was actually collecting intelligence on him, trying to figure out who the heck he was. I have his IP address, I have his phone number. And so the conversation continues. And one of the things that, I'm going to close my email here, so I'm getting dinging. One of the things that was a big issue at the time was that among the scientists, they were all talking about the missing link for SARS-CoV-2 because they were looking at all these different variations of SARS coronaviruses that were being manipulated in the laboratory. And there was no common progenitor between SARS-CoV-2, the wild virus, and these other agents that they had developed. And what that means is there was no missing link in terms of a virus between the other two, between the different agents. There were some close relatives, but not the exact missing sequence. So I had this question in my head, and this idea. I was going to tell him, and I did tell him, that I had a copy of the missing sequence data on a hard drive that was locked in a safe. And the reason why I told him that was a couple different reasons. One, I wanted to see whether or not someone tried to get in the house to get that information out of the safe. And if someone did try to do that, it would confirm a couple different things. One, someone at EcoHealth Alliance likely had the missing sequence data because I would have had access to it. The other thing that could potentially confirm is someone within my classified compartment, where I worked in the government, could have had access to the missing sequence. So after I told this Bennett character that I had the missing sequence data, the hard drive goes missing from a lock safe in my house within a day or two. And so I called and reported this to the Marquette County Sheriff's Department, the Michigan State Police, and a number of different federal agencies, because what they actually stole was a Department of Homeland Security food and agriculture target list. And I know that might sound like a tangent, but so when I was a PhD student, I worked in the Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence, and I'm actually a subject matter expert on how to use the U.S. food system or global food system as a delivery vehicle for weapons of mass destruction. So part of my dissertation research and late continuing research sort of throughout my career is we went around and we analyzed and collected all the data for all the different food facilities in the United States. There's actually about 2 to 3 million food facilities in the U.S. that engage in processing, manufacturing, packaging, repackaging, shipping, and distribution of food, for everything from liquid milk to all the ingredients in the hamburger. So we had all these data about all these different facilities on one hard drive. And for each facility, we went and analyzed, we did what's called like a red team assessment. So if we were going to attack this facility, how would we do that? And could we weaponize this food facility by taking like a batch mix process and adding a poison, a bacteria, a virus, a toxin to it to ship that poison out in something like liquid milk, for example, to see whether or not we would kill a bunch of kids in elementary school. And we were doing this with the intent of, by identifying the vulnerabilities, then we could go back and mitigate the risks. And the US government then would give grant money at that time to the states and to the infrastructure that we're analyzing to mitigate threats. So this is typical national security risk management framework. Well, on this specific data set, it had everything from intentional contamination scenarios to destruction scenarios, including arson. And it had all the key people involved. And really, it is the roadmap of, and the list of all the most critical facilities in the US. So if there's 2 to 3 million facilities, only a few hundred of these facilities are highly critical. And these were on these data that were stolen from the safe. Along with it were the materials, the methods, my notes about, my scientific notes, my lab notes, modeling simulations of what would happen if we actually contaminated this supply. We would actually build simulations to see what would make it out to the consumer or to the person consuming the product. So this was stolen. And so not only did I report the theft, I reported this as a national security incident to the FBI, DOD, DHS, you name it, alphabet soup. Well, in 2022 and 2023, and maybe even into 2021, there was a spate of arsons against food facilities in the United States. So when I noticed this, I'm like, God, this is really weird. And that some of the facilities I actually recognized as being critical facilities that were well known as, this is a facility you would destroy. And so then I went and analyzed and investigated 200 of the incidents. And of the 200, I think roughly 90, I could confirm looked to be intentional attacks. Like it wasn't an outlet. I was being very conservative with my estimates, so I didn't want to have like a false signal from saying that all these are terrorist events. So I used a very high threshold to analyze these. And when I did the statistics and the probability calculation on whether or not these facilities were statistically associated with that data set, the result was 1 in a trillion. And I had never seen a statistical value that the probability calculation that high in my life. They say that the chance of these sequences in SARS-CoV-2, for an example or comparison, it's a 1 in a billion chance that these man-made sequences would have occurred in nature in the actual wild type virus that we see, wild type, I'll say. So, I was pretty upset about this, as you can imagine, because here we have the Department of Homeland Security Food and Agriculture target list being weaponized back against the United States because it had to, it's statistically impossible that somebody would just go pick all these facilities at random, and they'd happen to be the most important ones in the United States. And I know that shortly after I started reporting this, I think the FBI sort of went into a panic mode, because the FBI agent that I reported to didn't even know what the FastCat data were. And she was supposedly a weapons of mass destruction expert, but yet she knows nothing about the sector that she's trying to protect. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So it comes out that they started to put out messaging that, well, it could be the Chinese doing this. Well, I've been working with a number of different state governments now, and I'll get to that here in a second, and other national security experts, and we don't believe that this was the Chinese. It looks like it fits more the pattern of Antifa or eco-terrorists, or maybe a foreign government from Europe, or someone operating clandestinely that has a large footprint in the United States. Because if you look at how it's spread out, the United States is huge, and you look at the distribution of all these facilities that have brought down, it seems to be regional in nature. The rate at which they happen, it could have just been one person, so you'd have to have multiple teams doing this, and they'd have to be socially networked. So that remains a mystery. There hasn't been an investigation, but so as part of this, 5 weeks ago, I took it upon myself to start warning and disclosing to the different states and industries and companies impacted that there was a national security breach, and just to be aware of what's happened. I've actually been sending emails out to every state legislator or state senator in the impacted states. And that has had a very, I guess, I wouldn't say warm response, but I'd say sufficient to warrant independent investigations in several different states against the state of Michigan and Marquette County for their failure to investigate the theft of the national security data. Because if the federal government's not going to do it, the states also have the right to investigate this because it's their critical infrastructure that they're protecting. So, I mean, all this is unfortunate, but if the federal government's not going to investigate this, we have to do something.
Again, is this a cover up, or is this just incompetence? And I mean, why it happened 4 years ago, right? And then whatever happened to the guy that you talked to? Is it Mike Bennett, the naval intelligence officer? Did you ever talk to him or see him again?
No, I haven't spoken with him since, and that could have been a pseudonym, that could have been a fake name. So I don't know if this is the same Mike Bennett or not. But when I started to dig around, who is this Mike Bennett character? There is a Mike Bennett that is a naval intelligence officer that also worked at the Department of Homeland Security. His wife just happens to be a naval intelligence officer as well, and also the FBI CIA liaison, which is an interesting role. So I don't know if it's this couple or not. But the really strange thing is that the U.S. government hasn't investigating this, and they haven't provided me back with any information. Even more fascinating is that I actually have biometric data, which I collected because I'm a trained criminal forensic investigator. I have fingerprints that I've collected from my house. And the Marquette County Sheriff's Department, the Michigan State Police, and the FBI have all refused to analyze these prints. So if you have all these different entities refusing to analyze fingerprints associated with major crimes, it sort of leads you to one conclusion, is that this is probably law enforcement involved. And why would law enforcement be in my house without a warrant? I mean, it's sort of bonkers. Who knows? Maybe that's not the case, but the truth can be found. You just simply need to analyze the fingerprints.
Are the attacks continuing, or have they calmed down? Are they? Oh,
it's been quiet at my house actually for a couple of years. And for the audience, I mean, this is sort of old news. I mean, it's funny that it's finally making it to the national level, or having impact at the national level. Finally, I mean, this stuff happened 3 years ago, and it had been mostly quiet, and it's mostly quiet around my house. I mean, I think maybe because my profile is higher now, I do get a few strangers following me around or looking at me, but that's just that's to be expected. I'm sure you experience the same kind of thing.
Well, I have no idea. So I'm not trained in those manners. But what are the attacks on the food plants, the food processing centers? Are they still going on, or is that subsided?
No, it just magically stopped. And that's what's even the weirder part. It really went on. It seemed to be at a pretty steady pace for about a year and a half. And then it trailed off. And I don't know if it was because of the fact that I was on some other platforms, because I think one of the first journalists to take the story on was Emerald Robinson. Mm-hmm. She was the only person that would discuss it. And so I think once the story started making it more to the mainstream, then it fizzled out.
Well, before we go, I want to touch on another thing you talked about on the Tucker interview, and that's the synthetic biology, which really sort of rattled me. The idea that we don't need a virus, we can create one in the lab now out of nanotechnology and using AI to do it. It just sounds terrifying to me. So, can you expound on that, the things that you talked about on the Tucker interview?
Sure. So machine learning and AI, and I don't like to call it AI because it's really not general intelligence, but everyone calls it AI now. But so, for lack of a better term, AI is being used to construct different molecular sequences and also genetic sequences. And they've used this now for the rapid coding and prototyping of the mRNA platform, for example. Just staying within that line of technological development, they're to the point where you can actually have synthetic clones of viruses. And that we're already to that point. The interesting, and when I say synthetic clones, it's basically you're taking the recipe for something that already exists and just constructing it out of the same type of material. So it's not really that advanced. Now, the synthetic biology component gets to be a little messy because there's what's real, what's sci-fi, and what's possible in the near future. And you don't want to be framed as a quack from going too far into the sci-fi realm. So there's a lot of debate about what we should call these synthetic beings. You can call them synthetic entities. They're not at the point yet where they're self-replicating, and that's going to be the next challenge. And once that challenge is tackled or surmounted, we'll be able to we'll be in the next phase of this where these things can replicate on their own. So we're at the point where these synthetic units can be created. There's three primary, I think, or three different possible ways that, let me make sure I get this correct. There's three different base technologies and approaches to this. So one, you could have a life mimicry concept. So that'd be a carbon-based chemical reaction type unit. You could have a silicone-based unit, and within that you could have like a nanobot processing things, and then you have total miniature, like a micro machine, basically creating other little micro machines. And it's hard to determine which one of these is going to be the most successful because they all have different advantages and disadvantages, and these are all different competing technologies, and I think there could even be some convergence right now between them. One of the most interesting aspects is that some of these synthetic units are being used in computing to make sort of like bionic computers using chemical signaling, and that has a ton of application.
Wait. So a bionic computer?
Yes.
Like,
what does that mean? I didn't talk about this morning.
Like a robot? So, what is that?
So like using a cell-like structure, like a carbon-based cell-like structure to do communication and processing between units. And they're doing it with chemical signaling. So similar to like how a synapse works, right? Mm-hmm. So those things are in development. That was a pretty cool publication that came out, I think, just a week or two ago. I was reading about that. So all this crazy science is going on in quantum and nano. Quantum's not really there yet. The first kind of breakthrough just happened this last week as well. But in terms of this real this nanotechnology and synthetic life, it will have probably many dual use purposes in the future. I could see it being used widely in agriculture. I can see it being used in a whole new area of I guess what I'm trying to think of a good way to characterize this. A new application where you could apply it to equipment, for example. So instead of having a living organism that attacks other life, you could have this quote unquote living entity that attacks or works against some kind of material. So you could have it so it corrodes steel or eats the silicon of another sensor, or you could have it so it repairs the silicon in the sensor. You could have it so that it eats plastic. So you can construct, because there is no limit to what you can ask one of these entities to do. It really, the question is there some kind of scientific limitation to actually developing these things to do anything that you want it to do? So it's a paradigm shift in the terms of the way that we've looked at using genetically modified organisms, for example, because the genetically modified organisms will typically only work against other living things. So it's always within the the ecology of life. This new technology takes it out of living things and makes it to objects.
You're not making me feel any better. I mean, if this technology gets in the wrong hands, I mean, no wonder we're trying to cozy up to China, because if our enemies get this, I mean, there's, it's, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, but it just sounds like, the nuclear bomb on steroids. I mean, am I right? Or, give me a worst, give me like a worst case scenario. Give me something, just what could they do with this that would really wreak havoc on us?
Well, I don't know what's possible or plausible yet. Like I said, there's major obstacles to these things becoming fully self-replicating. So meaning you can build these individual units, but then to get them to do something, you'd have to build a bunch of them, and then you'd have to either release them, and they'd only survive or last or work as long as their components could survive in the world. Right? They're going to be limited by something, how much they could do. And of course, so how you always look at this from like an intelligence perspective is, what are the economics behind this stuff? Like, how much does it cost to manufacture? How much technical expertise do you have to have? Do they have the technical experts in training and education to do this? Additionally, do they have a motive to use this, and how would they use it? What are the technical limitations of the technology itself? So I don't think we're not anywhere close to a doomsday scenario yet with these technologies, because they are major technical roadblocks. Now, who could be working on this? China is probably working on this technology. Other modern industrial nations that are wealthy are probably working on this technology. There's certainly a number of large businesses and venture capital going on in this space. So bits and pieces. So we're at a position now where all the bits and pieces of this type of technology are all being developed in different silos of excellence. When you step back, like I do, and you look at the whole portfolio of all these different types of technologies, you're going to start to see them converging. And this is what I was getting at, Tucker Carlson, is that as these technologies start to converge and we figure out what works, then the next step then becomes, once you can get these things self-replicating, then the question is, what do you do with them? And that's what you're getting at. Sure, you could make you could argue that someone's going to make a fully synthetic kind of pathogen thing that could destroy humanity. Well, we can already do that. And argue against that. We could already do that with existing bioweapons technology, and it's oftentimes more difficult than you think. And we sort of discussed this morning. It's not easy to develop highly lethal, highly transmissible agents that can sort of take out the population at once. Is it possible? Yes. Is it easy? No. Then you have to ask the question: are there?
They got that mRNA shot in 80% of Americans. And I would venture to guess a large majority of those people regret injecting that in their bodies. So, yeah. So, they pulled that off, and so I don't know. I'm not as optimistic as you are.
Well, that's a little bit different, though. So that's nanotechnology, and they're, related by name, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's all sorts of nefarious use. Because if you look at how nanotechnology is used, there's a lot of great applications of it. Sunscreen, for example. Sunscreen is made with nanotechnology, and it works, and it's highly effective. It's not good for you if you ingest it. You have some health problems, but if you keep it on your skin, it prevents you from getting sunburned. Nanotechnology is in all sorts of material science applications, paint coatings, screen coatings. It's really everywhere. There's this whole other division of toxicology and epidemiology that's looking at nano exposure science. There could be other issues associated with this, right? But nanotechnology in general has done a lot of good for humanity already.
I'm just envisioning like inhaling nanotechnology into my lungs, and then it seeps into my entire body and takes me down. Is that a legitimate concern?
I don't think so, unless you're working in the factory. And that's actually, it's interesting you bring that up. That's how we get some of our rare exposure information. Like if you want to know what happens if you get to some chemical, and if you go look at the toxicity database that the government maintains, and you look in the reports, oftentimes there's limited tox data. And they had these case reports of people who worked in factories where they did that thing. They inhaled a bunch of something, and they're the only person, on the planet where they actually have any evidence or report of what happened to it. So I think the likelihood that you would be in a position where you inhale a bunch of some type of synthetic life nanotechnology is pretty far fetched currently.
Okay, they take drones full of this nanotechnology and they dump it on people. That's not a possibility.
Sure, what's possible, but what's likely are very two different things. So sure, it's possible. I don't think it's anywhere extremely close to likely. And remember how we started this conversation off. You have to look at how much it costs to make this technology.
Well, the government is funding it. The government will pay for it. Money is no object.
Oh, it is. When you work on this kind of research, actually, the money is an object, and you have to, when you work on this kind of high risk research, you have to show results. Otherwise, they're going to cut your funding off. So if you're going around wasting your money trying to dump your new nanotechnology with drones, you're probably not going to make it very far. And even worse, you're probably going to be in a situation where somebody might steal your technology from you to get their hands on it. I mean, that's another thing that happens in this type of space, is that you have a lot of other companies trying to create, and governments conducting espionage against your company, trying to get the technology from you so they can see how far along you are, replicate it. I think the first uses of this technology will be in agriculture, because if you look at historically how new biotechnology and what market it hits first, it's typically the animal health world, because it's easier to get things into market. And if we're using these things on plants, I think that there's in the soil, there's probably applications there. Now, once again, that's sort of getting into the sci-fi realm, because we're not close to there yet, but we're going to have to be developing surveillance systems for monitoring these new synthetic or units. If it's not quite life yet, we're going to agree to the term units, to monitor this technology and detect it when it exists, because we don't want to cause some kind of ecosystem disruption. And these are the classic issues that we always struggle with new technology development and using it to solve problems.
Who in the government is making sure all of this is safe? I mean, is there a regulatory agency that's monitoring all this?
Well, it depends. So the government's a massive, U.S. government's a massive enterprise. So it depends where it's being created, what the purpose or intent is for its creation. And then on top of it, though, if this technology is being developed in the private sector, they can just develop the technology unless there's some kind of exposure, occupational exposure risk through like OSHA, for example. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, some of this might be lightly regulated because it starts to get in the OSHA category if there's known hazards. And trust me, if you're working in this kind of stuff and you're concerned, you're going to protect yourself, right? I mean, that's usually how this works. So I'd say that the regulation on this is sort of non-existent unless you're doing animal or human subjects research. A lot of this, though, is advanced technology, so it falls under export control. So you're probably being watched by people if you're developing this, because they don't want it to fall into enemy hands. So with a lot of things in science, it's just not heavily watched, and we still don't have a gain of function ban, right? I mean, like gain of function research is still going on to this day. I don't know whether that will ever happen. And actually, I've changed my perception on whether or not it should even be banned in the first place, because if all of our enemies are engaging in gain of function research internationally, I mean, we should be doing it too. As terrible as that reality is, I'm accepting of it. If you have other people that hate the United States engaging in this work, we better be doing it too.
I don't think I'm going to sleep very well tonight. That's just a lot to digest, but thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on, and very interesting information, a lot to chew on. Where can people find you? And are you working on a second book?
Oh, I have 2 or 3 other books that are in production, and I keep on sort of changing the theses of those books, unfortunately, as history is evolving around the writing of those. They can find me on X. My handle is AGHUFF, AG Huff. Rumble, I haven't done any videos well, but if you use AG Huff at any of the social media platforms, it's the same handle on all those, and that's where they can find me.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on, especially twice in one day, and look forward to hearing. Hopefully, some of these government people will actually respond to your alarm with the food situation.
Well, the state folks already have. It's just a matter of the federal government catching up to speed, and I think they will eventually.
Great. Well, thanks so much for all your work.
Thank you.